I was asked to talk this evening about what keeps peace workers going. Why do we persist? We have allowed ourselves to tap into, to not repress our deep belief, our deep trust that war must be ended, that war can be ended. We have the audacity to believe and to act on the belief that war is wrong, that this violent institution permeating our society and our world can and should be closed down. Marianne Williamson, who's an author and lecturer, says, "War anywhere is an action that threatens peace everywhere." We applaud the Beatles fan who honored John Lennon recently by recalling that Lennon defended the idea that we do not have to fight wars. We were horrified when a confused, crippled old man was blown away in gunfire by U.S. troops securing Baghdad in 2003. We are horrified when families are murdered at U.S. checkpoints due to fear, arrogance, and a language barrier. When cultural norms are violated and innocents are killed in night raids. When young soldiers are blown to bits or suffer unbelievable injuries. Given the horrors we have witnessed over the past decade, it is not too surprising that James Carroll says we all may be suffering from a kind of societal post-traumatic stress disorder. We resonate with Steve Earle when he sings, even as a war approaches, "I believe there'll come a day when the lion and the lamb will lie down together in Jerusalem." It is sobering to realize we have spent our lives holding on to this dream of ending war, while our country has been high on the military, as Hans Blix has described us. Some of us have been opposing war since World War II, since we were in the throes of the nuclear arms race, since the Korean War, where the failure to end it still haunts us, since the war in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, since the Central American wars and the invasion of Panama, since the war in the Balkans, since the Gulf War and the 1990 sanctions and bombing of Iraq. In this last decade, hopes for ending war were lost in the attack on Afghanistan, the invasion of Iraq, and our not-so-covert attacks in Pakistan and Yemen. We persist because war must be ended. In many ways, we are sheltered from the reality of the wars that are fought in our name. When our Lehigh Valley Peace Coalition recently showed the film Rethink Afghanistan, many of us were struck at how little we know about the daily horrors of that war. Even if most of us have never experienced war directly, we know we are part of our country's war machine. So we persist because the war culture is pervasive and we must resist. We question why young people must face military recruiters at schools. Some of us symbolically or for real resist paying the federal income tax because about 50% of that tax goes to the expense of wars, past and present. Our culture welcomes military-themed holidays and parades. War stories from senior veterans fill our newspapers, pledges to the flag, and songs celebrating bombs bursting in air open our athletic events. Most every day we encounter vestiges of our country's commitment to war. In a strange twist, we could see this large propaganda effort as an affirmation that, as Eisenhower said, people really don't want war. So governments, politicians, military contractors, generals have to create these elaborate schemes to keep the country supportive of these deadly efforts. It has even become common for the pressing non-military issues of the day to play out in the military context. Gays struggle for rights, so a primary arena for the struggle becomes ending don't ask, don't tell in the military. Undocumented immigrants need an avenue to legal status. We don't just acknowledge college degrees in the DREAM Act, we also include military service as an avenue to citizenship, and recruiters celebrate. Climate change is a threat, so the military, ever the richest government body and the biggest consumer of energy, announces plans to spend loads of our tax dollars pursuing energy conservation, ignoring the obvious and best conservation effort, ending war. This is the same military that now spends about $400 to get just 1 gallon of fuel to Afghanistan over treacherous supply lines. Imagine what could be done with those fuel dollars for real energy conservation in our homes and community buildings. Then there is the false conundrum. We can't afford to create jobs for infrastructure, child care, or education at home, but we can't cut the military budget because that would put people out of work. A few refresher statistics from the Political Economy Research Institute. $1 billion of government spending on the military creates 12,000 jobs. That same billion spent on health care or home weatherization and infrastructure would give us 18,000 jobs. $1 billion spent on education would create 25,000 jobs. Spent on mass transit, 27,700 jobs. We persist because there are many very real threats to peace in our world. And it is important that those threats are discussed, understood, and acted against locally as well as nationally and internationally. And here are some of the current threats that haunt me and make me want to act for peace in every way possible. Poor villagers in Pakistan now spend their meager resources on sedatives and antidepressants as they try to cope with the buzzing robots, U.S. Predator drones sailing through the sky above their homes. In September, the drones attacked 22 times and killed at least 100 people. Drone strikes have quadrupled under President Obama, and the military plans to double drone production in 2011. While bridges and schools decay here at home, massive building projects have followed our troops to Iraq and Afghanistan. U.S. bases number around 400 in Afghanistan at this time. Joseph Stiglitz and Linda Bilmes now say their 2008 estimate of $3 trillion as the total cost to the U.S. for our war in Iraq was too low. Two reasons they give are the cost of treating and compensating disabled veterans has been higher than expected, and there are the costs of the might-have-beens, like, would the federal debt have been so high if not for the Iraq war? Or would the economic crisis have been so severe if not for the war? Robert Wright says income in the U.S. is now more concentrated in fewer hands than it has been in 80 years. The top 1/10 of 1% of U.S. citizens earn as much as the bottom 120 million of us. Maud Barlow, head of Canada's largest public advocacy organization, has reported that the 3 richest men in the world have more money than the poorest 48 countries. She also says in 2009, the global unemployed numbered 230 million, the highest ever recorded. And global climate change claims at least 300,000 lives and $125 billion in damages each year. She says, expecting food and water shortages, wealthy countries and global investment pension and hedge funds are buying up land and water, fields and forests in the global south, creating a new wave of invasive colonialism with huge geopolitical ramifications. All these realities and more let us know our love for the world and our fear for the safety of her creatures and her peoples is not misplaced. We persist because our work for peace makes a difference. We don't often see a march against war followed by a declaration from those in power that that war will not be pursued. But we know that it makes a difference in the life of the Lehigh Valley and in the lives of passers-by when we walk the 10 miles from Nazareth to Bethlehem each December. Many people are reminded of the peace message that comes with Christmas and indeed with the other winter holidays. We know veterans and others are deeply moved when they see Veterans for Peace marching to end war, not simply to remember its soldier victims. We know our local peace camp for children and the others that are held elsewhere plant seeds of cooperation, tolerance, and a love of peace. One recipient of local draft counseling during the Vietnam War, who has long since moved from this valley, he donates to Lopoco every year, often including a note about the importance of that draft counseling in his life. We know the 2006 action and trial of the Det 9 in the Lehigh Valley took the local questioning and concern about the Iraq War to a more serious level. I was sure we make a difference when in 1988 I sat in the dirt floor community building for some Guatemalan refugees in Mexico. A young teacher there asked us if we knew Brian Wilson, the Vietnam veteran whose legs were severed by a train as he sat on tracks in California, attempting to block weapons shipments to the wars in Central America. The teacher quoted Brian Wilson, who had said, "My life is worth no more than theirs. Theirs is worth no less than mine." We need to remember the words of Dennis Brutus, the South African poet, anti-apartheid fighter, and human rights activist who lived the difference that people's actions made in his country. Yes, indeed, we are up against the monsters of this world. Yes, indeed, they are masters of great power. But as my mother used to say, my dear old mother, my dear dead mother used to say, drink your tea and get your act together. There's a struggle to be waged. There's a battle to be won. We want peace and justice for the people of the world. We persist because we're preparing the way for change. The daunting crises that grip our world can lead even the most dedicated of us to despair. I'm sure we have all experienced times when we wondered, why do I continue this small effort against such overwhelming powers? It is at those times when I recall my saints of activism and hope. Our own Jenny Booth says, discouragement is a tool of oppression. The forces for the status quo of war and destruction of the natural world want us to be discouraged and thereby less likely to act for justice and peace. This alone is incentive to work hard, to tap our reservoir of hopefulness to keep us moving forward. Igor Rodinko, a World War II resistor and activist with the War Resisters League, was a striking figure when I knew him in the 1980s with a long white beard and bushy hair on his partially balding head. He went on speaking tours for the WRL. I loved what I call his earthworm theory. He said that in our work as peace and nonviolent activists, we are like earthworms. We are continuously preparing the soil for the time when the rain comes and the sun shines and the seeds begin to grow. We are preparing for the time when a Rosa Parks or a Martin Luther King emerge to swell the ranks of activists. For a time when oppression becomes so weakened that a Pinochet loses his grip on Chile or the Berlin Wall falls. For a time when the opposition to war becomes a moving tide, as it did with the huge demonstrations before the Iraq War in 2003. Pete Seeger talks about our inability to predict when our efforts will bring the positive change we seek. Unable to predict the future, we hold to the hope that change will come, and to the knowledge that people have brought about such change in the past. Our own Joe DeRaymond wrote, "It is up to us to resolutely try to hold accountable our government and corporate actors for their actions damaging humanity and the earth. To intervene if necessary with imagination, nerve, and a commitment to a nonviolent ethic that is strong in its resistance and generous in its joyful approach to struggle." Howard Zinn, possibly the greatest hope monger, ended his autobiography, "To be hopeful in bad times is not just foolishly romantic, it is based on the fact that human history is a history not only of cruelty, but also of compassion, sacrifice, courage, kindness. What we choose to emphasize in this complex history will determine our lives. If we see only the worst, it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember those times and places where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. If we do act in however small a way, we don't have to wait for some grand utopian future. The future is an infinite succession of presents, and to live now as we think human beings should live, in defiance of all that is bad around us, is itself a marvelous victory. We persist because we are called to continue the important work of those who have preceded us. Need I mention in this gathering the powerful witness of the historic peace churches over the decades? The aftermath of World War I's horrors brought us organizations like the Fellowship of Reconciliation and the War Resisters League that today continue the important work for peace. In my family, I had uncles who were conscientious objectors during World War II. They served time in alternative service camps. The conscientious objectors and the resistors to that war made huge strides for peace and justice while in prison or while doing their service, but they also became leaders for moving peace forward after the war. We owe a huge debt to the strong, humane, and generous call for nuclear disarmament that came from the victims of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Abakasha, and their fellow citizens. It is to be remembered and honored that priests and nuns like the Berrigan brothers and Liz McAllister were the ones to fracture the good order and be jailed for burning draft files with napalm and for entering weapons facilities to hammer swords into plowshares. We should also remember that in the 1980s, a feminist call took women to the Pentagon and other military sites to mourn, rage, defy the workplace of the imperial power which threatens us all. So this history leads us to break the new ground and find the message for peace that speaks in this age, this time, this place. We persist because we are called to inform, to inspire, to be inspired. There is a button produced by the Syracuse cultural workers that says, "It is not our ability to inform, but our ability to inspire that will turn the tide." This doesn't mean we don't inform ourselves and others about the problems we see in the world. But we often find that the information is out there. People in large numbers know that the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan must end. But how do we inspire them and ourselves to act on that knowledge, to help bring our wars to an end? Even as we are informed about the war against the earth, the BP oil spill being a prime example, we are inspired by the actions of Bolivia in calling the conference on climate change and Mother Earth last April. 10 years ago, the people of Bolivia inspired the world as they organized massive resistance to the Bechtel Corporation and thereby stopped the privatization of their water. We are inspired that Vandana Shiva and other environmentalists have recently filed a groundbreaking lawsuit in Ecuador against BP for violating Ecuador's constitution, which recognizes the rights of nature across the globe. In particular, the suit defends the rights of the Gulf of Mexico, which have been violated by BP's oil spill. In one of the most hope-challenged conflicts in the world, that between Israel and the Palestinians, actions continue to inspire more nonviolent work for peace. Families from both sides who have lost loved ones to the conflict work together to build understanding. The family of Rachel Corey, who was killed by an Israeli bulldozer, tells her story as one step toward finding justice for Palestinians. The Gaza flotilla, attacked in May while carrying aid to that small blockaded land, got widespread attention. Other flotillas will follow. We are inspired by the peace community of San Jose de Apartado, Colombia, and their courageous act of nonviolence and practicality, declaring their peasant community neutral as armed actors, guerrillas, military and paramilitary, fight to control their region. We're inspired that a massive resistance movement arose immediately in response to the June 2009 military coup in Honduras, even as we are saddened by our own government's support for the coup. We can find hope in the young people of Afghanistan involved in the group Our Journey to Smile. They write, "For those of us who live in war, we have a heightened awareness that the end comes to all of us eventually. But we wonder if, in the short meantime, we can find compassion and truth." They have held vigils and conferences, and their young doctor advisor Hakeem writes, "We have a crisis not of terrorism, but of what it means to remain human, and to resolve this, we need to reconcile our maddening hearts to the imperative of ending all wars. We persist because we are called to be in communities of peace. Sometimes we find ourselves standing alone, and that can be quite powerful. Charlie King sings about a woman who stood alone on a Kansas City street corner on the day we began bombing Iraq. Her tall sign read simply, "God bless the people of Iraq." We have all acted alone, but I think it is community that keeps me going, that keeps us going. The community of this peace walk, the community of our church peace groups, our community peace groups like the POCO and Veterans for Peace, the communities we join or form for our various peace efforts. There is a sacredness to our peace community, to our efforts to end war. We know that each of us can come up with better ideas than the war and violence so commonly offered as the solution to our world's problems. As we search for those better ideas in community, our chances are increased for finding a message or action that breaks through the apathy of the status quo. These many examples of concrete actions that people have taken, are taking to end war and build a safer world, let us know that our work does make a difference, that we are not alone, that we too can find a way to raise our voices. We can be grateful that even though we have only begun, we have begun. We have an obligation to continue the witness, but also the opportunity to do so as part of a large peace effort through the ages, with great geographic and human diversity. There is a Denise Levertov poem, Beginners, that often inspires me. But we have only begun to love the earth. We have only begun to imagine the fullness of life. How could we tire of hope? So much is in bud. We have only begun to imagine justice and mercy. Only begun to envision how it might be to live as siblings with beast and flower, not as oppressors. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. We can't predict when the present wars or war as an institution will cease. We can't know how it will be accomplished. But we can be part of what moves us forward to that goal. A big challenge now is figuring out how to convince our neighbors that 25% or more of the military budget must be cut now to get us on a path to ending the cycles of violence coming from our government. Bring our war dollars home to address all our very human and humane needs. Such first steps can save lives and get us moving in the direction of compassion. We must keep walking, vigiling, praying, sitting in, writing, speaking out, until the strangest dream that the world agreed to put an end to war is no longer strange, and until the riverside, where we laid our sword and shield, contains all the disarmed weapons of war.
Wow.